Hello and welcome to Soul Talk. This is Rabbi Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron, they say that there's two Jews and three opinions, which I think very much reflects the challenge that we often have so many different perspectives and opinions, which is a very good thing. I think sometimes people will say, oh, if you're religious, then you're sort of being indoctrinated. And you're told what to think. And then I think as Jews, we see even within the framework of Torah life, we have lots of different perspectives and opinions, which can be wonderful, but can also be challenging because so often these opinions, differences in opinion, can really divide people, can divide families, can divide relationships, can divide our nation. And unfortunately, it seems as though when we're going through tragic times, painful times, we come together. We definitely saw this in the Purim story, right? The Jewish nation comes together when it feels like we're all in the same boat. We realize that. We see it even now with what's going on in our present history. And I guess the question is, how is it as Jews we can have so many different opinions, we feel very strongly about them, how can we still find a sense of connection and togetherness without needing a tragedy to bring us together?
Well, let's first talk about how actually, what is it about tragedy that does bring us together? One of the interesting things is a number of years ago, a fellow came from the East, a Jewish guy who'd been meditating in the East, and he came to Israel and decided he would like to know what Judaism has to offer him. So I brought him to a great Kabbalist, and he said to this great Kabbalist, I've been in the East and I've witnessed amazing miracles. I've seen gurus, masters point to a bird and it dies. I saw a master walk through a wall. I saw a master lie on a bed of nails. What does Judaism have to offer me? And the Kabbalist said, all we've got is love your neighbor as yourself. So the question is, what are we looking for? We're looking for magic, or we're looking for connection. I think we're really, really looking for connection. But what does it really mean to love somebody? Love is composed of two very different ingredients. One is, I'm not you and you're not me, because if I'm you and you're me, then there's no relationship. I can't be you and you can't be me. On the other hand, there's got to be a connection. And that's the weird thing about it. If there's no connection, there's no relationship. But if I'm you and you're me, then there's no relationship. So relationship is this interesting combination of being other and yet connected. And being other means to have a different opinion, not necessarily, but, that comes up. The interesting thing is that if you were to take a person again from the East who spent months meditating, and then brought him to our highest, let's say, center of spirituality, to a yeshiva, then he would be shocked. What are these people doing, yelling at each other, arguing with each other? And much of the time of a fellow in yeshiva is arguing over how to understand this particular piece of the Talmud. And you would think, and it's actually described as a war zone, and you would think that this would not be a place of peace. And yet after you see these two fellows learning together and arguing together, maybe even the volume gets a little turned up and how heated the argument gets. At the end, they give each other a hug and they walk to lunch. Because real oneness doesn't mean we agree with each other. Real oneness is we respect that you have a different opinion than me. And we can be one. I don't have to like your opinion to like you, because we're not our opinion. That's one of the things that's really amazing when people study Torah, and there's much commentary that goes into studying Torah, and I have my commentary, you have your commentary, and we have this conversation, maybe even get into an argument. And then what happens is that if a person starts getting fixated on their opinion and starts thinking, if they show my opinion is wrong, that means I'm wrong. If they show that my opinion was a mistake, that means I'm a mistake. When you learn to not identify with your opinion, embrace it, care about it, but don't identify with it as if it's the very foundation of your identity. And if you're wrong, it's not that you're wrong, it's this thinking is wrong, and you'd be happy to take on another thinking. And so what gets in the way of being together is not that we have different opinions, it's that we don't realize that in our essence we are one, even if we do have different opinions. And it could be like, is it heads or tails? No, it's a coin. Mark Twain has this great teaching. He said, maybe you didn't make a bad choice. Maybe you just had poor imagination because there was a third choice you didn't even think of. And so the fact that we are very different and we have very, very unique perspective on things, It says that in the future, the righteous will be in a circle and God will be in the middle of the circle. And we'll all be, and it will be in like a dancing circle. And we're all going to take, a step to the right or to the left, doesn't matter. And we're going to step into the perspective of the next person beside me and the next person beside me and realize these are all different perspectives. I once thought of taking a picture of my table from 100 different points of view and closer up, further away, and then put all those pictures on a wall and ask somebody if they know what this is. And they would probably think this is 100 different things when it's really 100 different perspectives on one thing. And so what brings us together is to know that in the soul of our souls, we are one, and that we are meant to have a diversity of perspective, and that's okay, and that's rich, and that's very beautiful.
You shared so much. One of the points, though, I want to try to understand more is you really made a separation between my opinion and me. And it really struck me that and therefore, if I can recognize just because you disagree with my opinion doesn't mean you're rejecting me. And I was giving it, as you're saying that, giving it thought that I have a sense that a lot of the reason why we do take things so personally, when they say don't take it personally, is because we do connect ourselves to our opinions. These are my thoughts. This is how I think about the situation. And I connect that thought thinking to me as a person. And it seems to me as though that really is a challenge. But you're saying here that we have to actually, we're not our opinions. I have an opinion and there's me. So how can one get into a mind space to not take it personally, so to speak, by recognizing that if someone disagrees with my opinion or my thinking, doesn't mean they're rejecting me?
What we have to learn to remind ourselves pretty often is I have a thought, but I'm not a thought. I'm the thinker. I'm kind of like a computer screen. Imagine a computer screen, and across the screen rolls a ball. And the screen thinks I'm a ball. But the ball rolls off the other side of the screen, and then a dog comes onto the screen. Oh, now I'm a dog. No, you're a screen. You're the screen, and you are facilitating, you are accommodating these images, but you're not those images. Those images are within you, but they are not you. And I think we have to remind ourselves that I have an opinion, but I'm not my opinion. And if someone could point out how this opinion that I have is not doing me the best service, is not most accurately describing what actually is happening, I'd be happy to let go of it. I'd be happy to let go of it. Let me give me a way of thinking that will serve my better interest in terms of my highest good. And I'd be happy to let go of it. That's what I think is very interesting. And again, in the higher learning centers of Jewish learning, there's a lot of argument between how you see it, how I see it, how you see it, how I see it. There's a tremendous therapy going on in there, and having arguments is learning to let go of the opinion and not identify with it as the source of your value. But I have an opinion, I have a commentary, I have a way of seeing it. It's not who I am. It's just the way I'm seeing it right now. And I'm totally open to seeing it another way.
So everything you're sharing, it makes a lot of sense. I hear it, and again, even on a national level, it seems like, okay, right, once I have this understanding, I can make space. But I was thinking as you're sharing it too, as a nation, we're made up of individuals, and the core of each family is really also marriage. And so often, I'm thinking about this, that in relationships, especially in a married life, couples argue over differences of opinion. And instead of being able to separate it, it becomes very emotional and personal. So especially in that context, how could someone take the emotion out? Because I'm thinking in the yeshiva, there's an understanding we're here to argue opinions, and it's not personal. But even though on the one hand I'm hearing you in my head, right, in all relationships, why can't we just recognize you have a different opinion than me? You're not the same person as me. But it does get very emotional and personal. And sadly enough, when we can't even have achdut, unity in our homes, then it's a bigger question. Each home is what builds up the nation.
Well, it goes back, the story about three men that have been blindfolded and they're holding onto an elephant. And one says an elephant, and they don't know they're holding onto an elephant. One says an elephant is long and lanky, and he's holding onto the trunk. The other one says, what are you talking about? An elephant is thick and stocky, and he's holding onto a leg. The other thing, what are you talking about? The elephant is thin and kind of like a membrane-ish, and he's holding onto his ear. And they don't realize that they're all describing the elephant from the most limited perspective that they have, and that the elephant is much bigger than anybody's perspective, and it's possible that we're both right, and I should be open to hear your perspective and not feel challenged that because I need to understand that reality and truth is much bigger than my perspective. And as I said before, it might not be heads and it might not be tails. It might just simply be a coin. And you're on the head side and he's on the tail side. And I'm happy to hear your perspectives because you're giving me a point of view that I don't have access to. And I'm very excited to hear that because the truth is much bigger than each and every one of our points of view. And together, our points of view can piece together a more accurate panoramic understanding of what it is. And so I think it goes it goes to humbleness, humbly accepting that I don't have the whole picture. And nobody does have the whole picture but God. And because I don't have the whole picture and I have a very unique angle that I'm seeing the picture, so then I'm happy to hear other angles because you're seeing the angle from a different point of view.
That really helps a lot, especially the analogy of seeing the same even animal, right? The thin tail versus the thick legs, and not realizing we're seeing the same thing but just different pieces and parts. It really does help because I am thinking that a lot of times we have a story we tell ourselves. So if my spouse disagrees with me and I take it, but the story I say is, oh, it's a personal attack, then of course I take it very personally. I have to protect myself, and then I'm protecting myself. It just turns into a bad cycle. But if the story I tell myself is, he's a different person. He's seeing this from a different perspective, and thinking about that example, right? If I'm by the tail and he's by the thick leg of the elephant, it feel different. It's gonna look different. Everything's different. So that perspective change itself can really make the difference of almost like, oh, curiosity. This person is different than me, so they're going to have a different perspective. Let me try to hear it out. And I think we often don't hear someone else out because we're so busy protecting ourselves when we feel like we're being attacked.
Right. And it has to do with this diluted sense that I see the whole thing
Hmm.
and that the whole thing isn't much bigger than my perspective. Somehow I think that I have a panoramic view of reality when nobody does. You know, Torah teaches that if you save a soul, you've saved a world. But in our tradition, a world is a world view. And everybody sees things differently. And we should enjoy hearing somebody else's point of view because I don't have it. And I find it expanding, not challenging, not threatening. It's like it's true. You know, the elephant is stocky. The leg of the elephant. I don't have access to the trunk. Tell me about how the trunk feels. And I should, rather than feel threatened by hearing other people's opinions, I should feel excited and invited into something that's more expansive and encompassing and broadening my perspective on things. And we could disagree, but maybe we're not disagreeing. We're just arguing over two sides of one coin.
And I think the point is it doesn't even have to be an argument. What a sad reason to feel disconnected when just the change in perspective and recognition, we're seeing this situation from totally different vantage points. And that's why it looks so different to each of us. And I have a piece of the puzzle and you have a piece of the puzzle. And maybe if I can listen to your piece, it's almost like expanding my view from where I'm standing. And if you listen to my piece of the puzzle, it's expanding your view. So what you're really demonstrating here is the power of expanding the right perspective can totally change what turns into argument after argument after argument to curiosity to say, wow, I actually have the ability to see more by hearing your perspective. And you have the ability to see more by hearing my perspective. It's a whole new vision. A lot more happens when we work together.
Right. It reminds me of a funny situation I was in. I went to someone that does drawing analysis and, for you to understand your personality. So part of the analysis is to draw a tree on the back of the page. So I started drawing my tree, and there were two other guys at the table. They were drawing their tree. So one guy drew this huge tree that took up the entire page. The other guy drew this little tiny tree in the lot on the bottom right corner. And then something really funny happens. Big tree looks over at little tree, and I see he's disturbed. He's having a hard time until he can't hold himself back and he says, "Excuse me, I hope you don't feel I'm interfering, but you read the instructions wrong." And the guy says, "I did?" He says, "Yes. It says clearly to draw a tree on the back of the page." So the guy said, "Well, that's what I did." He said, "No, you didn't. That's not a tree. That's a shrub. And that's not the back of the page." That's a lower right corner of the page. You got it all wrong. Here, this is what he wants. And he shows them his picture of a big tree. And the poor guy starts rubbing out his little tree and copying the other tree. And I'm cracking up laughing because both their trees were wrong. My tree was right. In other words, all it said is draw a tree on the back of the page, and everybody has in their head what that means. And it means different things for different people, and that's okay.
Wow, that's another great example when it comes to different perspectives, but we can, instead of feeling threatened by someone else's understanding and interpretation, curiosity to say, oh, it can mean different things for different people. That helps a lot as far as understanding. As I said, I went almost micro of, couples, relationships, two people, smaller groups. But one of the things I asked you about at the beginning, maybe now I'll get more understanding of it, is that it seems like in times of tragedy, we can somehow come together. And I guess this could also sometimes be true even in smaller groups. We put our differences aside. And what is it about that helps us come together? And how could we come together without needing some tragic situation to make it happen?
Well, it goes back to the story we tell ourselves, which is much of what life is about. Do we tell ourselves that we are different perspectives, and yet in the deepest depth we share one soul? Think of God as electricity, and each and every one of us is an appliance. And he's a radio, and she's a light bulb, and he's an air conditioner, and she's a stove. And they have to realize that in their essence, their life force is electricity. Even though electricity is manifest different in each of these appliances, it's manifest as the power of light, the power of heating, the power of cooling, the power of sound. But these are facets of one power that embraces them all and fills them all, which is the power of electricity. And so there's something inside us that knows when we get into trouble that, hey, we're very different, but in our essence, we share one soul.
Wow. So that really actually does give an explanation about how it is that troubled times help us. It's basically, again, a perspective shift. It's reminding ourselves that we really are one, and these differences that we're getting caught in are actually to our detriment, not helping us. But I would imagine then ultimately, like even on a smaller scale between two people, you're right, it really builds itself up, because the more, within our relationships we have, we are a nation built up by individuals, by relationships of those individuals. But I would imagine then the more we can work on having this perspective in our personal relationships, the more there's a transformation that slowly starts to go out to the whole nation.
Right. And it goes back to how we feel about ourselves. You brought up, how do I not feel threatened, and how do I feel not insulted, and feel attacked? Well, if in your head you've got this story that someone's trying to attack you, you'll find evidence that someone's trying to attack you. If you tell yourself, this is my husband, this is my wife, they have no reason to attack me, they don't want to attack me, they're just sharing a perspective. In the deepest of their deepest depths, we're one and yet not one and the same. And that's what makes our relationship a relationship and so beautiful. And it's okay to hear another opinion.
So really, we each of us individually rework our whole perspective. Then we don't have to wait for tragedy to have unity. We can have unity even without needing the tragedy to give ourselves a clearing of all the things that don't really matter so much and give us a focus on what's really the most important. If we can work on it on a smaller scale than on a big scale, again, we hopefully can avoid having to have tragic situations bring us together, but we can stay focused on the power of unity and the power of a change in perspective without needing the hard things to happen.
Right, right. It says, Mi hacham, who's truly wise? Halomed mikol adam, someone that learns from everybody. Everybody I can learn something from, because they have a different perspective. And why would I limit myself to just my perspective when I could be so enriched by hearing their perspective? And we could be very different, but not necessarily exclusive or mutually exclusive.
Wow, I have to say this is so powerful because, lack of unity or disunity is such a big issue. And yet it's so simple the way you're explaining that it comes down to we need to all change our perspective. And sometimes it could seem like, but this is a whole national problem. It comes down to each of us changing our perspective, one relationship at a time. And that's we take building block by building block and we transform ourselves, our relationships, and the entire nation. I want to thank you all for joining us. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.